Have you ever wondered why the quiet after a woman leaves is often louder than any argument, sharper than any goodbye, and heavier than any spoken word? The silence she leaves behind is not empty. It is full, swelling with meaning, charged with presence. For the man, it is not simply her absence he feels. It is the echo of his own shadow pressing against him, unrelenting, forcing him to confront himself in ways he has long avoided. A man may believe he is strong, independent, self-contained. But when the feminine departs, not in rage, not in chaos, but in stillness and choice, he begins to feel the weight of everything he projected onto her. She was his mirror, his muse, his audience, his balm, his battlefield. And when she walks away, she takes with her not only her body, but the reflection of his ego he once saw shining in her eyes. That sudden silence is not hers, but his. It is the hollow space where his identity once leaned upon her recognition. Carl Jung wrote of the anima, the inner feminine in a man, unconscious. And when she departs in the external world, he feels the fracture inside himself. He is no longer buffered from his own emptiness. He can no longer run from the voice he silenced with her laughter, nor hide from the darkness he covered with her affection. When a woman walks away, the man is forced into confrontation with himself, and most men do not know how to withstand it. In that silence, his thoughts begin to claw at him. He wonders if she ever loved him, if he was ever enough, if her absence is proof of his inadequacy. But the deeper wound is older, deeper than her. It is the primal wound of abandonment, the ancient fear that without the feminine he is cut off from the living pulse of his own soul. This is why silence is unbearable to many men. It is not her silence he fears, but the void within himself. You may have seen it. You may have felt it. The shift when you stop speaking, stop chasing, stop giving. When your energy withdraws, he feels the withdrawal as if life itself has dimmed. And though he may appear strong, stoic, detached, inside the storm rages, he feels the agitation of the ego losing its supply, the rawness of vulnerability exposed. He may seek distraction, another woman, another drink, another endless scroll of noise, but no distraction can fully drown out the truth that now haunts him. Her silence mirrors his hollowness. The Stoics warned that a man who depends on external validation is enslaved, not free. Seneca wrote that, "A man is not free who is a slave to his body." And in the silence after she walks away, he learns this bitterly. He was enslaved not only to her presence, but to the image of himself reflected in her. He sees now that his power was never his own, but borrowed from her attention. When that attention fades, he feels stripped naked, unarmored, unguarded. And here lies the paradox. What he feels in that silence is not merely loss, but recognition. Recognition of how deeply she mattered. Recognition of how little he knew himself. Recognition that her departure was not just an end, but a summons to his own shadow work. He may fight it. He may resist. He may blame her, curse her, long for her. But the silence does not soften. It demands. It demands that he confront the truth of who he is without her. For the woman, this is the secret power of silence. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to reclaim the self. When she withdraws her voice, her care, her constant pouring, she reminds both herself and him that her energy is not infinite, nor should it be wasted where it is not honored. In her walking away, she becomes not absence, but presence of a higher order, presence to herself. And that is what unsettles him most. The realization that her silence is not weakness, but power. When a man feels this silence, he is not simply missing her. He is meeting himself, perhaps for the first time. And most men do not know how to stand in that encounter without trembling. In the long hours after she has gone, a man begins to feel time differently. Minutes stretch, nights become vast caverns where shadows creep across the walls, and every sound is sharper, yet emptier. The absence of her voice is not mere quiet. It is a void that amplifies all the things he cannot escape within himself. The silence is merciless. It does not soothe. It exposes. It unmasks the lies he told himself about control, about strength, about the permanence of her devotion. It is here that the psyche rebels. The male ego, accustomed to the rhythm of her presence, struggles against the unfamiliar vacuum. He feels as though he has lost a compass, for she had been both mirror and map. Her attention had guided his sense of direction. Her presence had anchored his restlessness. Without her, the world feels disjointed, scattered, unmoored. Jung would call this the collapse of the projection, the anima withdrawn from the outer world, forcing him to encounter the neglected inner feminine within. Most men recoil from this. They will chase distractions, drown themselves in noise, or search for substitutes to fill the absence. Yet no new woman, no fleeting pleasure, no intoxicant can fully mask the confrontation that has begun. For once the silence has spoken, it cannot be unheard. It whispers truths that cut deeper than her leaving, that he has been estranged from himself, that he sought in her what he denied within, that her absence has revealed the unfinished work of his soul. You must understand, the silence after a woman walks away is not passive. It is an active force. It is the pressure of reality demanding growth. It is the psychic wound of dependency torn open, exposing where a man has confused possession with love, control with intimacy, projection with truth. In that silence, his illusions bleed out. He begins to sense, often with dread, that she was never simply his companion. She was the mirror of his unconscious. And now, with her departure, that mirror shatters, leaving him face to face with himself. Have you ever seen a man in this state? He does not always rage. Sometimes he grows quiet, withdrawn, consumed by an inner heaviness he cannot name. Sometimes he lashes out, blaming her, blaming fate, blaming everything but the truth. And sometimes he becomes desperate, reaching back for her, not because he loves her as she is, but because he cannot bear the emptiness she has revealed. He wants her return, not for her sake, but for the shelter she provided from himself. The Stoics understood this torment. Epictetus warned that a man who binds his peace to anything outside himself will inevitably suffer, for fortune can take away what was never his to control. A woman's presence, her love, her giving. These were gifts, not entitlements. When she walks away, she reclaims them. And the man, stripped of what he mistook as his right, begins to see that he had never owned her at all. He had only borrowed her light to cover the darkness he refused to face. This is the silent crucible of his transformation. If he resists, he spirals into bitterness, resentment, endless grasping for substitutes. But if he allows the silence to work upon him, he begins to awaken. He sees that what he misses most is not her body, her words, her laughter, but the part of himself that she evoked. She awakened his capacity to feel, to connect, to soften. Without her, he feels hardened, emptied, brittle. Yet this brittleness is not the end. It is the breaking of a false shell. And what of the woman? In her silence, she does not merely disappear. She embodies a deeper archetype, the anima withdrawn, the queen ascending, the sovereign choosing herself. She does not beg to be heard. She does not plead to be seen. She lets silence speak in her place, and it says more than words ever could. I will not carry what is yours to confront. I will not bleed to keep you whole. I choose my peace above your avoidance. This is why her silence unsettles him so deeply. It is not the absence of love, but the presence of her power. A man can resist words, argue with accusations, even dismiss tears. But silence? Silence leaves him alone with himself, and there is no escape from that mirror. In that stillness, he feels his greatest fear, that she did not need him as much as he needed her. It begins like a phantom weight pressing down on his chest at night. He stares at the ceiling, restless, replaying fragments of her. The way she laughed at the simplest things, the subtle lift of her eyes when she was curious, the quiet warmth she carried without ever trying. He hears echoes in the silence, but the echoes are not hers. They are his own longings reverberating back at him. stripped of disguise. For in truth, what he is missing most is not merely her presence, but the part of himself that only awoke in her presence. When she walked away, she carried with her the projection he had cast. She was never just a woman. She was his unconscious longing made flesh. She was his anima, the bridge to his soul, the doorway to the emotions he had buried under armor and pride. And when she is gone, he feels hollow because the projection has returned to him, demanding to be integrated. Jung said that what we fail to face within, we inevitably seek without. He had sought her to carry the weight of his unlived soul. And when she refused, the silence became unbearable. This is why he feels torn between anger at her leaving and despair at his emptiness. His anger is the ego's defense, the last stand of control. His despair is the soul's cry, the realization that she was never meant to complete him, but to awaken him. And yet, awakening is agony when one has lived half asleep. Do you understand how dangerous silence becomes for a man who cannot bear to face himself? He will try to outrun it. He will drown himself in work, chase the shallow thrill of new faces, or numb himself with substances. He will convince himself he is free, that he does not need her, that she was replaceable. But beneath the surface, the silence waits, patient, unyielding. Because silence is not absence, it is confrontation. It is the soul knocking at the door, whispering, what you ran from in her, you cannot escape within yourself. Some women never realize the depth of this impact. They underestimate the power of their withdrawal. They think leaving is just an ending, when in truth, it is an initiation. To walk away is not merely to exit his life. It is to strip him of the shield he wore against himself. That is why the silence cuts so deeply. It is not cruelty, it is revelation. And what does he feel, truly, in the heart of this void? A profound loss of identity. For men often anchor their worth in the reflection they receive from a woman's eyes, her approval, her devotion, her acceptance. These are not just affection, they are validation. When she is gone, he must face the brutal reality that his worth cannot be borrowed. It must be owned. And if he has never built it within, he collapses. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But most men learn this only after loss. Only after the silence presses upon them do they recognize how fragile their foundations were. They thought love was a guarantee, when in truth it was a mirror. They thought her presence was proof of their strength, when in truth it was her gift of patience. The silence after she walks away exposes this. It is a teacher, though a brutal one. For some, it destroys. For others, it awakens. Have you ever felt this kind of silence yourself? The kind that forces you to sit with the parts of you you would rather avoid? That is what he feels multiplied tenfold. Because she was not just a woman. She was the carrier of his shadow, his longing, his vulnerability. Now, stripped of her, he must meet those parts unaided. And here lies the paradox. The very pain he resents is the pain that can set him free. If he surrenders to it, if he stops running, he begins the process of individuation. He learns to reclaim his anima not in another woman, but within himself. He discovers that what he longed for in her was always meant to be born in him. But such discoveries are costly. They demand the death of illusion, the burning of pride, the dismantling of false power. The silence after she walks away is not empty. It is the sound of rebirth beginning. Yet rebirth, like any birth, comes with blood, with pain, with surrender. Most men fight it, few embrace it, and that is why her silence is not weakness. It is archetypal power. It is the call to transformation. And for him, it is the moment where he must decide, collapse into bitterness or rise into truth. There comes a moment when the silence no longer feels like absence, but like a mirror. A mirror that does not flatter, that does not lie, that does not soothe. He sees himself there, stripped of the borrowed glow he once basked in, left with nothing but the raw truth of his own incompleteness, and it terrifies him. Because men are often trained to build castles of control, to construct an identity out of achievement, dominance, or the approval of others. But when she walked away, she dismantled that scaffolding in a single stroke. What remains is the naked architecture of his being, fractured, trembling, and untested. This is the wound of projection collapsing. Jung described it as the withdrawal of the anima from the object onto which it was cast. When a man loves without self-awareness, he does not love her. He loves what she represents, the muse, the healer, the savior, the dream. And when she departs, he believes he has lost her, when in truth, he has lost the fantasy that protected him from facing himself. The silence after she walks away is the brutal return of his own soul to his keeping. No more outsourcing, no more escape. And yet, it is here, in the hollow ache, that transformation whispers. For if he dares not to numb, not to run, not to chase distractions, he may begin to hear something beneath the despair. A pulse, a calling. The anima returns, no longer in her form, but within, urging him to reconcile with his vulnerability, his sensitivity, his emotional depth. What he once sought in her embrace, he is now commanded to uncover in himself. Most men resist this. They would rather hate her than heal themselves. They brand her as cruel, cold, ungrateful, for it is easier to condemn than to confront the truth. But hatred is only a mask for grief, and grief is only love without a place to land. His tears, if he allows them, are not weakness. They are initiation. They are the soul's baptism, washing away the arrogance of thinking someone else could carry the burden of his becoming. Do you see the irony? He believed she needed him, but it was he who needed her. Not as a partner, but as a mirror. And when the mirror is gone, he must choose. Will he keep searching for another woman to carry the reflection? Or will he finally become the reflection himself? Here the Stoics converge with Jung. Epictetus reminded, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Self-mastery is not domination, it is integration. It is the courage to hold one's shadow without fear, to embrace weakness without shame, to cultivate tenderness without apology. That is what the silence demands of him. It is not punishment, it is training. It strips away illusion until only essence remains. Imagine him sitting in that silence, at first restless, then exhausted, then finally still. In the stillness, memories arise not of her face, but of his own boyhood, the lonely child, the fearful adolescent, the insecure young man who never believed he was enough. These selves come forward now, unhidden, seeking reconciliation. For what he sought in her was not romance, but redemption. And she, by walking away, denied him the shortcut. She forced him onto the harder, lonelier path, the path of inner repair. This is why her leaving was not a cruelty, but a gift. Though he will not see it at first, though he may curse her name, though he may spiral into bitterness, eventually, the silence will teach him that no woman can save a man from himself. Only he can. Only by meeting the shadow, embracing the anima, and integrating the unlived parts of his psyche can he rise whole. And yet, the silence also speaks to her. For the woman who walks away is not powerless. She is the weaver of destiny. By stepping back, she refuses to be a vessel for his unconscious. She refuses to play the role of mother, muse, or savior. In leaving, she asserts, "I am not your shadow, I am not your projection. If you wish to love me, meet me as I am, whole, sovereign, free." And so, the silence becomes a crucible. For him, it is confrontation. For her, it is liberation. In its weight, the masculine is tested. In its emptiness, the feminine is affirmed. Both are refined, both are reborn, though in very different ways. The man who can endure this silence without collapsing into despair or rage emerges not weaker, but stronger. Not because he won her back or proved his worth to the world, but because he learned to stand unshaken in the presence of his own soul. He is no longer ruled by projection, no longer enslaved by validation. He becomes sovereign, as she already was. And it all begins in the silence after she walks away. The silence does not vanish overnight. It lingers like a ghost, visiting him in the quiet moments when the world grows still. At first, he fights it, drowning it out with noise, distractions, or new faces meant to fill the void. But silence has a way of waiting. It does not rush. It does not negotiate. It follows him into every room, every conversation, every attempt to forget. For what he tries to escape is not her absence, but his own unhealed presence. This is where the deeper work begins, where Jung's teaching on individuation takes root. Individuation is not about becoming what others expect, nor is it about fitting into the roles society prescribes. It is about becoming whole, reconciling the conscious with the unconscious, the shadow with the light, the masculine with the feminine. And the silence after she leaves is the perfect catalyst for this initiation. Because in that silence, his old identity collapses, leaving only the raw material for rebirth. Many men, however, falter here. They search for another woman to project upon, to carry their disowned soul once again. But each repetition grows emptier, each new relationship more brittle, until the pattern becomes unbearable. For projection cannot sustain love, it can only sustain illusion. And when illusion inevitably crumbles, the pain is sharper, the despair more profound. That cycle continues until he finally faces what he most fears, himself. The man who dares to face this silence begins to hear another voice within, not hers, not society's, but his own. The voice of his deeper nature, long suppressed by the need to perform, compete, and dominate. This voice is softer, more vulnerable, more authentic. It is the anima awakening within him, not as a woman to be desired, but as a living presence in his soul. She whispers to him of intuition, of creativity, of gentleness, of empathy. She teaches him that strength is not hardness, but balance, that love is not conquest, but union, that freedom is not detachment, but alignment with truth. And yet, do you feel the paradox? To gain this, he must lose her. To awaken the anima, he must endure abandonment. To discover himself, he must accept that no one else can complete him. This is why her departure wounds so deeply, because it slices through the illusion that love is about possession, that intimacy is about control, that companionship can erase loneliness. The silence forces him to understand that the truest loneliness is not the absence of another, but the absence of oneself. If he listens, truly listens, the silence transforms from tormentor into teacher. He begins to notice the patterns of his own mind, the anger, the blame, the shame, the yearning, He sees how he sought validation through her, how he made her responsible for soothing wounds that predated her. Slowly, painfully, he realizes that no partner can heal a childhood wound. No lover can repair a fractured identity. The responsibility is his alone. This realization is not cruel, though it feels merciless. It is freedom disguised as loss. For once, he accepts that his healing does not depend on her return. He begins to reclaim his power. He no longer begs for scraps of affection, no longer molds himself to please, no longer rages at rejection. Instead, he begins the slow work of reconstruction, building an identity rooted not in illusion, but in truth. Do you know what emerges from this? A man no longer enslaved by fear of abandonment. A man who can love without clinging, who can give without demanding, who can face solitude without despair. Such a man does not love from hunger, but from fullness. He does not need a woman to carry his anima, because he has integrated her within. He meets her as she is, not as a projection of his unmet needs. And this is where the story turns. Because when such a man encounters a woman again, perhaps the same one, perhaps another, the dynamic is transformed. He no longer binds her with expectation, nor chains her with dependence. He does not need her silence to awaken him, because he has learned to sit in silence on his own. He no longer seeks salvation outside himself, and thus he can finally love in truth. This is the alchemy of absence. The silence after she walks away is not the end of him, but the end of who he once pretended to be. It strips him of illusion so that he may stand naked before himself, vulnerable, yes, but also real. And in that reality, he discovers the one thing he never expected to find in loss, the beginning of his freedom. Freedom is a strange thing for a man who has lived most of his life tethered to the expectations of others. At first, it feels like emptiness, like something essential has been stripped away. But in truth, it is the shedding of chains disguised as grief. The silence after she walks away does not only reveal the loss of her presence, it reveals the loss of his illusions. Illusions about control, about ownership, about identity, being dependent on validation. And once illusions fall, something radical takes their place. Authenticity. Jung reminds us that the shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of power rather than shame. For the man who endures silence without running, his shadow begins to reveal itself not as an enemy, but as a guide. He sees the arrogance he once carried, the pride that shielded his insecurity, the way he masked need with domination or withdrawal. He sees the child still living within, longing to be soothed, terrified of rejection. And instead of projecting this child onto her, demanding that she mother him, that she rescue him, he begins to hold that child himself. This is the turning point, because once a man learns to parent his own wounds, he becomes unshakable. No longer is he tossed by every rejection, every silence, every abandonment. He sees love as a choice, not a lifeline. He sees women as mirrors, not saviors. He no longer blames her for leaving, because he understands. She did not abandon him. She simply refused to carry what was never hers to hold. And here lies the paradox of true strength. The world teaches men to conquer, to control, to chase, to win. Yet the man who has walked through the silence discovers that strength is surrender, courage is vulnerability, and victory is not conquest but peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's worth is measured by the things he gives power to. When silence comes, it shows him where he has placed his power, in her approval, in her presence, in her gaze. But the Stoic lesson is clear. External things cannot grant inner stability. The only domain he truly rules is himself. So imagine him now, not the broken man begging for her return, not the bitter man resenting her absence, but the man who has made peace with silence. He sits with himself, no longer needing noise to drown out the ache. His heart is still scarred, but the scars no longer frighten him. They remind him of who he was and of who he refused to remain. He has stepped into individuation, the path of becoming whole. And do you see what happens next? She loses her power over him, not because he hates her, not because he forgets her, but because he no longer seeks completion through her. He may remember her with tenderness, with gratitude, even with longing, but no longer with dependency. That is when he becomes most magnetic, most alive, most free. Because the man who does not need you is the man who can truly choose you. And choice, not desperation, is the essence of love. This is why some women, without realizing it, return when he no longer waits. They feel the shift, the solidity, the quiet gravity of a man who has faced himself and survived. They sense he has stepped beyond projection, beyond games, beyond fear. And whether she returns or not, it no longer matters. Because the gift has already been given. He has claimed himself. For the silence that once tormented him has become his initiation. It has transformed from the cruel echo of her absence into the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. It has stripped him down to nothing, only to reveal that in the nothing he is more than enough. And so the story closes not with her footsteps, not with her silence, but with his awakening. Because the man who has walked through abandonment without losing himself is a man reborn. He no longer chases shadows. He no longer bargains with worth. He no longer mistakes possession for love. The woman who left becomes a symbol, not of loss, but of liberation. She was the catalyst, not the cure. Her absence tore him open so that he might see the one truth that cannot be taken away.